we got to talk about it, Coach. Today is the beginning of what they say is the tampering window in free agency. We all know there's been some conversations before today. We're not that naive, but let's talk about inside those buildings. In these days like this, obviously you got some control whatsoever of a little bit of the guys you've had you can talk to, but outside of it, we're throwing numbers around. We're hoping and praying a guy wants to come here. What were those days like from a stress standpoint and how you get into free agency?
Yeah, it's agonizing, as you know, especially for a coach. I can only imagine how it was for you guys, not knowing where you're going to be, not knowing who you're going to be playing for, where you're going to live, but a lot of uncertainty. But that's what the combine really is for a lot of head coaches and GMs. All the agents show up in Indianapolis. You don't think we're just sitting in our room at night. We're out there hustling these agents, trying to see if we can get in on some of these players. And you want to protect some of your own players. So you got to meet with your own team, your own players, agents, and you got to meet with some prospective agents, some guys you'd like to get in front of and jump out of the gate with.
Hey, Coach, weirdly, speaking on that, I don't know why. Some reason, the only time I ever attended the Combine, it was the 1 year I was a free agent. I don't really understand how that works, but for some reason, I ended up at the Combine and in a bunch of conversations. It was a weird year just to show up all of a sudden like that.
That's before the tampering period, isn't it, Whit? What's going on there?
Oh, no. Just running into people, accidental, oh, boom. Oh, hey, you know what? Y'all happen to be left tackle. How you doing?
What about, so you're first time head coach with the Raiders and dealing with Al Davis. Do you have any good button head stories with Al Davis back in the day? Maybe players that you wanted that he didn't or vice versa?
Well, let me tell you, Fitz, I got a lot of stories. Just trust me on this one, Butch. I've done it a long time. But, yeah, I had a lot of respect for Al Davis. He put every dime, every second, every bit of energy he had into the Raider franchise. And a lot of us were there to give him some input, but ultimately he was going to make the decision. He had a real vision for the kind of players he wanted. Whit, he liked you. He liked Raider bodies, he called them. He wanted big guys, bigger than the other guys, so we could kick the shit out of you. That's what he wanted. And he wanted speed. He wanted guys that could fly. We had silver medalists. We had freaking Olympic trial athletes. We always had big guys and fast guys. And it started right there. And it held through the draft and into free agency. But Al Davis was not afraid to pull the trigger. We signed Jerry Rice, Andre Rison. He didn't care who they were. If they were a great player and they were available, Al Davis would sell a percentage of the team just to get some money to get the guy. And I loved every second of it because he was a football guy and he'd do anything he could to win.
Speaking of selling percentages of teams, I think the Cincinnati Bengals are in that situation right now. Huh? I mean, when you want to get T. Higgins and Jamar Chase back in the building, you might have to sell a percentage of the team to get those two guys under contract, it looks like, in Cincinnati. When you talk about those situations, Coach, when you really got these players that are dynamic, and it's like, hey, how do I keep this guy in our building? Obviously, some guys got to go. There's going to be feelings hurt. But how do you try to handle these situations when it's guys that you know you want, but sometimes contractually it's just not going to be possible to keep everybody?
It's impossible. It's hard. I remember when I got traded to the Buccaneers, I went into a meeting and Rich McKay said, well, do you want work done or do you want Simeon Rice? And I said, well, the last coach got them both. I'd like to have both of them. He says, well, obviously you don't understand our salary cap. And that really pissed me off. Some things are out of the coach's control. I remember when I went back to the Raiders, we had a pretty good player named Khalil Mack who was a free agent. He wouldn't even return my calls.
I
think we offered him $50 million. He ended up getting $100 million from the Bears. But a lot of these things are very emotional, very hard. You want the best players, but there is an economic part of this, and there is a budget that you have to be considerate of because you got to pay a lot of players. And in the Bengals case, what do you do? I'm seeing Trey Hendrickson is asking for a trade. You're not a very good defense. You better, take care of your team and not worry about loading up on one specific position. But I do believe if you have a blue chip player in his prime, you should never let those guys out of your building somehow.
You talk about the emotions of it and seeing guys go the other way. It's something similar going on right now with the Los Angeles Rams and Cooper Kupp, heading out after the commit. Really the contributions he's had have been unbelievable, Ram, and now they're parting ways. As you look back on your time being a head coach, and we say those kind of things, people get excited about the moves. Hey, oh, you signed so-and-so. But I think a lot of times we get lost in the shuffle is maybe the guys that you're like, man, crap, we had to move on from this guy. And maybe we made this decision or that one that it was tough and it's a hard decision. And we don't realize how much emotion goes into these type things. Is there some free agency redos that you can think of? Like, man, I wish I'd have made a different choice here, or a guy that you think of in that situation?
You know what? I'm sure there is. I mean, a lot of it, I don't want to blame anybody or come on some show
Right.
like, we screwed this up. I remember the Khalil Mack thing. I came out of basically the booth to go coach the Raiders. And I don't want to walk into Oakland without my best players. But I didn't realize his contract was expired and he was an unrestricted free agent. And it was very difficult to get him re-signed, very difficult. But that was a tough pill to swallow when you walk in the building and you got a 26-year-old pass rusher that you never even get a chance to talk to. That was tough. But there's a number of guys. I remember losing Nelson Aguilar, believe it or not. He comes over from Philadelphia, has a real nice year for us, has about 900 yards and 18 yards a catch. And he played for the minimum for us, a 1-year contract. And the Patriots gave him $12 million. And I remember Aguilar calling me saying, just give me 7 or 8. I'm like, we don't have it. We don't have it. We have a budget. And sometimes you just can't rob Peter to pay Paul every time. But there's a lot of players I fell in love with, man. I didn't want to lose them. And I would be pissed off at the general manager for weeks. I'd be walking around in a state of rage, But it's
You
just
better draft well. This better be a good draft.
business. That's why, you know what, guys, when I worked for the 49ers back in the day, Eddie DeBartolo was the owner. And it was before free agency. There was no free agency. We had the best player. Steve Young was our backup quarterback. We had 2 Hall of Famers. Our nose tackles were Michael Carter, Jim Burt, and Fred Smerlas. We only played 1 nose tackle at a time, but we had the greatest team ever. And now those days are over. So you've got to really be careful. You got to hit your draft picks. Some of the mid to late rounders in particular are really important in this draft.
How big was that keeping guys like Maxx Crosby happy? He just signed that big deal as a pillar of your program. And how much does he mean to that team?
Yeah, I think he's shit. When you watch a guy's effort,
Rare.
And when you watch his playing percentage, that's the one thing people don't realize. A lot of these defensive linemen nowadays play 57% of the snaps, 66% of the snaps. And that's not being disrespectful. That's a fact. Maxx Crosby plays every snap. He played every snap for 9 straight weeks. And he plays it at supreme effort. He's like Robert Mathis was of the Indianapolis Colts. He's not getting the credit he really deserves. But as you know, Whit, this guy's a pain in the ass, man, because when you are a little bit tired from walking up that mountain.
I'm sitting right here because guys like him.
But you better have a
no
plan
doubt.
for him. You better have a plan for him. You better chip him. You better throw it quick, move the pocket, keep him off balance, run the ball at him. You got to do some things or he'll ruin the game. And now that they get Christian Wilkins back, Malcolm Kuntz is another young pass rusher who missed last season. He's a hell of a young player. I like the Raiders up front, and I like the fact that Pete Carroll's in charge with Geno Smith. I think they're on the right path right now.